The title of this video is How to Release the Ego Without Fighting It. And this is the third video in the Journey Beyond Your Mind series. When you try to find safety, security, fulfillment, and love through an ego-controlled mind, you eventually come to realize the solution does not exist within the control of the ego mind. As a matter of fact, the search itself becomes a trap. So what seems to be the natural thing to do is you keep doing, you keep trying, seeking more, acquiring more, control, possessing, but you never achieve lasting contentment, fulfillment, or absolute security. You can develop a frenzied feeling, in fact, if you keep going, thinking that somehow, someday, you're going to attain fulfillment and happiness. But this will never occur by living with the false conclusions and beliefs the ego has used to construct the identities that it uses through you to survive in the realm of illusions. Some have referred to this as an ego or a soul trap, but I have an entire video that goes into this. It's on YouTube, and I would suggest that you take a look at it because it's far more important than you might realize. It's an important subject, and it affects you and will affect you at the conclusion of this lifetime. The problem is not that you aren't trying hard enough. The problem is that you are trying to complete yourself with a very identity that believes it is incomplete. And that is a completely different problem. Once you see this, the question is no longer, what else do I need to acquire? The question is, now, what do I need to release? And that question takes you directly into how you begin to identify the specific components of the ego that are keeping you trapped. How do you successfully address an ego? It has so many different creative, protective defense mechanisms. Well, first of all, you need to identify the components of the ego that trap you or trigger you. You don't have to understand every component of the ego before you can begin. You simply have to learn to recognize what is operating within you when a particular pattern appears. For instance, one common subpersonality or identity that you can operate with is the archetype of the warrior. I find a lot of people have this archetype working through them. And the warrior acquires or gains things through struggling and fighting and conquering. So when you want to attain or acquire something, could be anything, a job, a house, a car, a relationship, or maybe a successful business venture, the warrior in you believes that there must be a struggle to obtain it. There must be something to overcome. There must be something to conquer. And if you have doubts or beliefs that you don't deserve something, the warrior style can become even stronger. It'll kick in with more strain and more struggle, more fighting, more resistance, or basically what I would call paying a price. And then and only then can you give yourself permission to have what you want. There's something about this ego-based pattern that has unconsciously decided that struggle is the price that you must pay for having what you want. Maybe you've noticed this. What if somewhere inside of you, there's an unwritten agreement that says, if I can receive something too easily, then I don't deserve it. So I must struggle for it. And if I haven't suffered enough or struggled enough, I have not earned it. Once you recognize this possibility, you begin to see why you repeatedly create obstacles in your own life and might even sabotage the goals that you want. You aren't consciously trying to make life difficult. The ego personality is following the rules of internal belief contracts. This belief contract has several components. One component holds that when you seek your dreams, you will also create obstacles and challenges. In addition, you can also demand that your dreams and desires be filled with hidden problems. The unwritten belief contract then requires struggle to pay a price to compensate for feeling unworthy of attaining a dream. In other words, because deep down inside you don't feel worthy or deserving, your dreams have to be earned by paying a price of sacrifice, which could include struggling and suffering or even loss. Now, let me explain this with a short story. When I was a young child, my parents took me to an amusement park with a large carousel. I haven't seen one of those in a very long time. The one I loved to ride was an old-fashioned merry-go-round where riders had the opportunity to reach for a brass ring. As the carousel revolved, a mechanical arm held a ring out just a little beyond easy reach, so you'd have to stretch and lean out from the horse to get it. You'd have to time your movement very precisely and then strain to get your hand far enough to be able to grasp the ring. Most of the rings were ordinary iron rings, but there was always one that was made out of brass. And when you successfully capture the brass ring, you would get a prize. So you might have heard the phrase, reach for the brass ring, because it's become a metaphor for reaching and stretching and striving in order to get the prize. And it wasn't easy, I'll tell you, to get that brass ring. Most people missed it. Each time the carousel came around, you'd try harder. You'd lean further. You'd stretch out more. And more often than that, you would miss the ring. So you determine the next time around, I'm going to strain a little harder. I'm going to concentrate more intensely. Believing that if you would just work hard enough, reach far enough, and struggle enough, eventually, if you are lucky, you'll get that brass ring. Now consider what happens if you unconsciously carry that same pattern into your life now. You have an inner contract that says, before I can receive the reward, I must pay a price. And the price is struggle. You must work harder than you have. You must overcome obstacles. You must prove yourself. You must suffer. You must strain. And only then do you feel entitled to receive what you want. So the struggling becomes part of the program. You don't simply reach for the brass ring to receive it. You believe you have to earn the right to receive it by making the reaching difficult. And this is where the program becomes self-perpetuating. You encounter something you want, your unconscious mind creates resistance. You struggle against the resistance. And then you interpret the struggle as evidence that you're doing what is required in order to have it. So in other words, your mind will say, this is hard, so I must be on the right path. So you strain a little harder. You push a little bit more. You work harder. And when you finally succeed, the struggle itself becomes proof that you deserve the reward. But what if the struggle was never the price? What if the struggle was actually just a program? What if you've been riding around and around on a carousel, repeatedly reaching for the brass ring, not because success requires extraordinary effort, but because some part of your mind has decided that success must be difficult before you can be permitted to have it? So now the question is no longer, how much harder do I have to struggle and strain? The question becomes, why have I decided that I have to struggle to receive? Where did that come from? Another aspect of this belief contract requires that you experience villains in your life so that you will suffer for believing that you did something wrong in the past, or you didn't do enough good things to tip the scale in your favor, or you think you're unworthy. And then, once again, you believe you've suffered enough, then you can allow yourself to have your dream. Now, think about how strange this is. You want happiness, but you set yourself up with circumstances that make happiness difficult to attain, and certainly difficult to sustain. You want love, but you create situations in which love must be fought for. You want prosperity, but you believe prosperity has to be earned through struggling and hardships, and maybe even multiple failures. You want peace, but you feel guilty when life is peaceful, and so it doesn't last. And therefore you conclude there must be something wrong with you, or you're not enough, or you've done something wrong, or you violated some cosmic law. The dream is not the problem. The belief contract surrounding the dream is the problem. The belief contract demands that you need to suffer in order to fulfill a contract of beliefs. So there's always a price to pay. What then happens is that you oblige yourself by fulfilling the need to be taken advantage of in some way. You stress yourself, you overwork, you become discouraged. And this is where surrender becomes practical. You don't have to fight the warrior. You don't have to defeat it. You begin by recognizing it. You begin by noticing the part of you that believes struggle is necessary. You begin by noticing there's a voice that says, just one more obstacle, one more little suffering. I just have to earn this. I don't deserve it yet. And once you can recognize the pattern, then you are no longer completely identified with the pattern. So you can observe it and sense it and begin a process of disidentifying from it while releasing and clearing the subtle energy in the memories that contain that belief contract. So now repeat these assertions twice to yourself. I now surrender and release all need for suffering and struggling. I now surrender and release all need for suffering and struggling. I now surrender and release all need for fear and guilt. I now surrender and release all need for fear and guilt. I now surrender and release the need for thinking I am undeserving. I now surrender and release the need for thinking I am undeserving. I choose to surrender and release this all now. I choose to surrender and release this all now. I open to receive the light and freedom of my soul. I open to receive the light and freedom of my soul. As you repeat these words a number of times, with heartfelt feelings, you're going to notice something happens within you. You'll notice you start feeling lighter and freer. You can feel as though you've been released from a prison, and suddenly you recognize how much weight and burden you've been carrying. You may have known only that something was wrong, and that life was a struggle. But now you're beginning to recognize what was creating the struggle. For even if a minuscule part of you desires or believes something, that becomes your fate and your destiny. You may have said to yourself, I don't believe in karma. Or you may have set yourself up with karma beliefs from this life or a past life. You may have set yourself up to have some of these experiences of loss or struggle. Beliefs are what pull you into lifetimes where you keep repeating them until you grow tired of them, or you finally get serious about releasing them and dissolving the energy in the belief, in the thought forms, in the contracts that are driving you to experience them. And that's what I'm offering you now, the way out of the trap, way out of the recycling and the repeating over and over and over the same problems. I'm not oversimplifying the process. In fact, the ego does not release an identity simply because you have intellectually decided that you no longer want it, or even if you say, I don't believe it. All the negative ego identity programs are hooked into you at unconscious levels. And so there's a part of you still attached to what the identity provides in your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any problems. And this is why you have to look carefully. You have to become dedicated to discovering even the most subtle belief that you need to struggle or suffer. So I can cover some of these topics in general terms in these videos, and I can give you some specific examples. But your job is going to be to dig deeper into the unique ways that you have sabotaged yourself. What form of pain have you been experiencing? Who are you blaming? What emotions do you have? What beliefs have you been experiencing and telling yourself? What conclusions have you come to? What fear or worry do you have about your future? You see, the ego actually doesn't want to or like to release anything. It basically believes it might need it in the future. So even though there may be suffering and pain, the ego mind thinks, well, at least I know what this is. But if you release it, that means we're going to enter into the unknown. And the ego imagines that that might be far worse than what you're having in the present. And this is why the methods for letting go and clearing are sometimes difficult, but yet they're simple, but not necessarily easy. It takes dedication. It takes time. It takes a lot of discovery to find all the nuances that underlie all of your struggling and suffering. And then it takes more time to convince the ego mind to cooperate with releasing what it's been holding on to. Here's a way to do that. You can talk to the voices in your mind that don't want to let go. Most of the reasons are pretty simple and obvious, such as, I want you to feel safe and secure. That's why you have anger. That's why you have fear. That's why you keep people at arm's length. That's why you isolate yourself. That's why you feel hopeless and helpless and futile. The voice itself is coming from a program that believes it's protecting you. So it says, I hold on to fear to keep you from making a mistake. Now, of course, you can see there's a problem with this line of reasoning. So here's how you respond. You explain very plainly, I have found something that will keep you more safe and secure than the fear or anger that you've been using. So what this sentence does is it gives the mind a good reason to release something because you're offering it something that it's actually looking for. Some people have said that the ego likes pain and suffering. That is not the truth. It just does not know how to solve its own problem. It doesn't know where to look for a solution. So if you give the mind a good reason to release something, it will offer a lot less resistance to releasing and will often participate with letting go. If you approach it from the point of view, look, I'm on your side. I want to make this easier for you, and I want to help release and relieve you of suffering and actually heal you and help you to find the love and completion that you've been searching for. The ego, believe me, it'll perk up and it'll listen to that. And it'll say, tell me more. Maybe we can work together on this. So if you've listened to some of my meditative videos, you know they help you connect with the soul. And the soul is the solution, which is the title of my first book, The Soul Solution. And the soul is what brings in safety and security. And that's something the ego mind can't do on its own. So I'll be leading you through more of this as we proceed in this video and in future ones. Sometimes it's also a good idea to precede your intention to surrender by saying, I give myself permission to surrender the need for whatever it is that you want to release. The struggle, the low self-esteem, feeling like a victim, feeling like you deserve punishment, whatever it is. You give yourself permission to surrender and release the need for it. So I will often stipulate that I'm requesting a full release and dissolution from the causal body. The causal body, that's your causal body, is traditionally where karma is stored. I've always referred to the causal body as your belief universe because it's like a warehouse of all of your conscious and unconscious beliefs. And karma is a belief. Negative karma is about 80, maybe even 90% from guilt. Of course, there are other reasons as well, but that's the predominant reason for guilt, and also one of the predominant reasons that keep causing people to reincarnate. So listen to my video on the soul trap and how to escape it if you want to get more information on that. So when you make a request that's very sincere from your heart to release yourself from all of these negative patterns from the causal body, you then free yourself from the karma. Karma, like everything, is a belief. I've had people tell me they know karma is an illusion, which it is. But so is everything, every limiting belief you have. But yet knowing this doesn't necessarily break you free from it. People tend to like thinking of themselves as more evolved than they are. So be careful that you don't deceive yourself or trick yourself on this issue. Your condition will tell you if you have cleared the karma and the blocks or you haven't. So all you have to do is look at your own life. If you have a contract with your soul and you believe something is true, and you tell your ego personality mind that you found something that can clear you and protect you better than it can, the ego will accept your word and lower its resistance, as long as you believe it. So if you've come to the place where you've made some connection with your soul, or at least you know about the soul, and you know the soul brings healing and love and light, and you know that and you believe that, when you say you have found the soul, which can bring the ego everything it's been looking for, it perks up its ears. It says, oh, if you believe that, then I want to know about that. The ego mind will believe you and it will relax its hold. So this is one of the approaches I've used in my private sessions for decades, but you can certainly use it yourself as well. That's why I'm sharing it with you. The ego personality is composed of identities and subpersonalities that have developed their patterns of thinking and believing and feeling and reacting. They usually operate automatically without your conscious awareness or intention, and there's usually a voice associated with them. So when one of the voices appears, don't immediately assume this is me. So you wouldn't say, I am angry or I am afraid. I covered this in the previous video. Your language would change that. You would recontextualize it too. The ego is angry, or the ego is feeling angry, or the ego is feeling afraid. You want to separate yourself, disidentify yourself, distinguish the real you from these thought forms, these recordings, which is basically all the ego is. It's just a big warehouse of recordings. So you might talk to the voice that says, I'm afraid, and you say, I recognize that you are afraid. Or, I understand you are trying to protect me. Or, I know you believe you need to do something necessary to keep me safe. There's something interesting about this approach, because now you're not fighting the ego. You're approaching it with concern and caring, and you're offering to bring it comfort and healing. And I know this is not the approach that many have taken when they say they're trying to kill the ego. But I have found that if you approach it that way, it's not going to be effective. Why? Because the ego is a fear-based survival personality construction. And telling it that you're going to kill it terrorizes it and stirs up all of its insecurities and fears. However, when you approach it by offering solutions to its pain and suffering, it will cooperate with the healing and the clearing process. Now think of this analogy. If you saw a small child fall down and scrape the knee, would you tell the child that, what's wrong with you? How could you be so clumsy? Would you attack a child? Would you take aggressive action against the child? Would you punish the child? Well, I sure hope you wouldn't, and no healthy person ever would. No, I think what you would do is you would comfort the child with a very caring, soft voice, and you would address the wound with medication or whatever is needed. And when you approach the ego in a similar way, it relaxes its resistance. It doesn't feel threatened by you. You're on the same team. You're looking for the same result: healing, safety, security, peace, love. And if you do what I'm suggesting correctly, sincerely, from your heart, it will even cooperate with you in removing its causes of pain, suffering, loss. It's a very compassionate and loving approach to addressing the ego and its pain. And it works. I've used this literally with thousands of people in my private sessions. As the ego lets go of its self-inflicted pain patterns, the soul is then able to come in and bring comfort and healing. And that eventually replaces the ego separation without trauma or struggling. It's actually the soul that's doing the healing. You're more like a catalyst giving permission, saying, it's okay, I'm allowing this, and I'm even giving my permission for it. At some point in its history, the ego identity believed that the way it was behaving and reacting was necessary. All of these patterns developed somewhere in your past as protective mechanisms. The patterns developed because some part of the ego personality, the identity, believed that what it did was necessary for you to have more safety, and to survive, and to be accepted, and to be loved, to feel secure, more stable. The problem is that what was once useful can become destructive over time when the original circumstances and threats don't even exist any longer. And this, in most cases, is what is happening. Now, the ego isn't tied into a linear time. It doesn't know that the danger has passed. It continues doing what it learned to do because it doesn't know when that same threat might pop up again. So if you think of the ego somewhat like an injured child, you can approach the ego with understanding rather than hostility. And you'll find that it is an effective healing approach and a very important method for attaining enlightened consciousness, which you are actually seeking whether you know it or not. So you can directly speak to the voices or to the ego and say, look, I understand why you learned to do this. I understand you are trying to protect me. But I no longer need you to protect me in this way because I found something that can take care of me and keep me much more safe, much more effectively. And that is the soul. Now, this statement introduces something the ego has a lot of difficulty discovering on its own. The idea that the old fear-based defense mechanisms are no longer necessary. The ego also doesn't have a real way to connect with the soul on its own. So now ask the inner voice what it is afraid would happen if it released its role, whatever its fear is, or its insecurity, or its defense mechanism, or its anger. What are you afraid of if you release the anger? And here's where the process becomes interesting, because you can discover that the anger thinks it's protecting you from being hurt. You can discover that the need for control is protecting you from something uncertain that might happen that's dangerous. You can discover that being more perfect, the perfectionism will think it's protecting you from people rejecting you. You can discover that guiltiness thinks it is protecting you from the possibility of being judged. You can discover that the need to struggle is protecting you from a fear that you don't deserve what you want. The surface behavior, emotional reaction, is only the visible part. Underneath, there's a belief. And underneath the belief is usually fear. And this is why simply saying, I'm willing to let this go, doesn't always let it go. This is why simply trying to eliminate a behavior or a reaction often does not work. You have to discover what the behavior is doing for the ego. You have to discover what the behavior is doing. And once you understand what it believes it is protecting you from, then you can begin to address the actual component rather than merely fighting its outward expression. You see, most people go after the anger, which is not a bad thing. But if you don't know why the anger is there, then it's just going to produce more anger. And so this is where observation becomes very valuable. Instead of asking, how do I stop being angry? Ask, what is the anger trying to protect? Instead of, how do I stop worrying? You ask, what does worry believe it is preventing? Instead of, why can't I let go? Ask, what does this part of me believe would happen if I did let go? These questions change the entire investigation. You are no longer fighting a symptom. You are discovering the mechanism beneath it. And once the mechanism becomes visible, then you can surrender it. You can use other energy clearing methods to release it and dissolve it. So this is actually where you need to be completely honest with yourself. Sometimes the ego component will insist that you still need it. So here's what I find that it'll often do. It'll cooperate with releasing a whole bunch of it. But then it says, if you completely stop all worrying, then something bad might happen. If you stop completely controlling everything, your life will fall apart. If you completely stop being angry, people will take advantage of you. If you completely stop struggling, you won't accomplish anything. What's your reaction? It further believes that it wants to hold on to a little bit because it thinks it might need them in the future. So it might even cooperate with releasing some of it, but you find there's still some left behind. You don't want to argue with that thinking. You listen. The goal isn't to prove the ego's wrong through some kind of an intellectual argument. Your goal is to understand what it believes, why it believes it, and then recognize that you are no longer required to live according to that belief. So you can acknowledge the fear without accepting the conclusion. You can say, I understand why you believe this, and I am choosing to release it and invite the soul to take over completely. This is your beginning to consciously surrender 100%. Surrender is not forcing yourself to stop feeling anything. It's withdrawing your agreement with the identity that has been creating an experience. This is why the distinction I established in the previous video was so important. The ego is feeling fear, not I am afraid. The ego is worrying, not I am worried. The ego is angry, not I am angry. You're observing, you're understanding the component, and then you're able to disidentify from it. Because the true self, who you really are, is the soul, not the ego. Whenever you're feeling a reaction or an emotion, or you have a thought or a judgment about yourself or someone else or something else, ask yourself, who is it who is experiencing this? There are two possible answers. If it's wonderful, peaceful, and loving, it's the soul. If it's anything else, it's some aspect of the ego. And this distinction makes it much easier to release because you're not rejecting any part of you who you really are. You're releasing a mechanism that has been operating inside of you like a program causing problems. So this choice is the doorway to freedom. Once you have identified an ego component, don't rush to get rid of it. The more you can learn about it, the more components of it you're able to release and identify. The more you can learn about it, the more components of it you'll be able to release and clear. So allow yourself a little bit of time to experience it and learn about it. Where do you feel this in your body? Does it feel like tension in your chest or your solar plexus? Do you feel pressure in your head? Do you sense there's a contraction somewhere in your body? Or there may not be any physical sensation at all. You might experience it as a thought. You might have a repeating compulsive thought, or maybe an image. Your mind might fixate on some memory. Or there might be a distinct emotional presence where you just feel this emotion. Whatever you experience, notice it, sense it, feel it, acknowledge it, tune into it. You don't have to make it immediately disappear. You don't have to analyze it. You don't have to judge it. You're simply observing it. You're gathering information about it. Remember, the ego is experiencing this. You are observing it. So basically what you're dealing with is a thought form. It's a subtle energy program. It's composed of a memory, your conclusion about the memory, which becomes a belief, and your emotional reaction to the memory. That's all the ego is. It's a collection of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of these. I don't know how many. And you don't have to figure every one of them out, because when you release them, they come off in big chunks. They're all related. So all of the thought forms of the ego that are related to anger, they'll all come off at the same time. You don't have to remember every memory where you got angry. But that's how this process works. And the disidentification is the foundation of it. So now, instead of trying to force an experience away, you allow yourself to become curious about it. And you ask, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you afraid would happen if you stopped being angry or afraid or worried? What do you believe you're protecting me from? And then you listen. You don't necessarily hear an audible answer. You might have a memory. There might be a feeling, or just simply have an understanding or a knowing, and it just pops up in your mind. You're not trying to force an answer. You're not trying to analytically make up an answer. You allow it to surface. You just allow it to come up and emerge to the surface. And that way you can discover what the ego component is, what it has been carrying as a belief, and it makes it so much easier for you to surrender and let it go. If I don't stay in control, something terrible will happen. That's an ego belief. That's what's in those thought forms. Or if I don't make everybody happy, they'll leave me. Or if I don't struggle, then I don't deserve to succeed. Or it could be something very personal that it belongs only to you. When you discover the belief, you don't argue with it. You simply recognize this is what a part of the ego has believed. You don't say, this is what I have believed. No, it's the ego. It's a recording, and you heard the recording in your mind, but that doesn't mean it's you. And this recognition is important because it allows you to see a belief without becoming the belief. So now you can begin to communicate with this belief or the ego component. So you might say, now I understand why you've been doing this. Now I understand that you believe this was necessary. But I no longer choose to live from this belief. I have found another way to live. And then comes the most important part, when you surrender it. Now, you cannot force yourself into surrender. There's no struggling with surrender. There's no straining with surrender. There's no trying with surrender. If you do that, you're just creating another struggle. Trying, struggling, and resisting are actually all functions of the ego. Instead, you enter a place of willingness, a willingness to release, a willingness to open, a willingness to receive, a willingness to let go. And so now you can say, I now surrender and release the need for this belief and fear. I let go and release it now. At this point, it helps to use your creative imagination to even form the image of a vacuum, removing the subtle energy thought form components. Now, I go through this process in detail in my video called Spiritual Neutrality Training to Eliminate Blocks. It'll take you through this process and break it down into steps. This is actually an important and effective technique for clearing the root cause of negative ego beliefs and ego thinking and reacting. I am willing to surrender and release the need for all pain, suffering, and struggling. I invite the light of the soul to fill me. I am fully in the peace and comfort of the soul's light. I give my full permission for this process to take place now. And then you be quiet for a moment and notice what happens. You're not searching for a sensation. You're not deciding in advance what you think is supposed to happen. You are observing. You are practicing something very different from the ego's usually way of operating. The ego will say, I have to make something happen. Your soul says, I am willing, I'm receptive, I allow. This is a distinction at the heart of surrender. You can experience a sense of lightness, release, freedom. You can experience a quiet recognition that something inside of you has shifted. And so whatever happens, you allow it. And you invite the soul to fill the space that has been released. You can say, I now receive the light, love, and healing of my soul. I ask the highest enlightened awareness of my soul to emerge. And you simply receive, allowing yourself to experience this. Not trying to manufacture a special sensation, simply becoming receptive. And this is important because surrender isn't merely removing something. It's creating space for something that is more aligned with your true nature. The ego has been occupying a certain amount of space with its fears, its beliefs, its survival strategies, its identities. And when you release one of those components, you actually create an opening in your field. And so into that opening, you invite the soul. Simply allow yourself to receive. The light of the soul is bright. It's white light. It's strong. It is also comforting. And you keep inviting in more and more of it. Allow it to melt any resistance to releasing. There may be some part of you that you haven't seen, you haven't identified, but the soul does know. And because you're giving it permission to come in and to do the cleanup, to find whatever you might have missed, and to keep dissolving, releasing, and replacing any resistance that might still be there. So you allow all the causes of pain and suffering to let go and allow and give permission to the soul to merge into those thought forms and to uncreate them, to disassemble them, to disidentify from them, and to dissolve them. And you'll notice that when this happens, you stop trying to make a transformation happen. You are more of a witness, an observer, and you simply become present and receptive and allowing. And as more of the light comes in and more of the soul comes in, it can feel like returning home because it brings in a very comfortable feeling, a feeling of safety, acceptance, and support. And once you reach this point where it has completely taken over, then you don't have to force anything to happen. You simply remain present and receptive because there is an innate intelligence in the soul. It knows what you know, and it knows what to do. It knows far more than your feeble little current human mind. It has a memory of all of your lifetimes, plus it is a direct interface into Source itself. So you notice anything that remains, you observe, and you remember what you've learned. You are not the ego or its reactions. You are an awareness that is observing it. And when you surrender and release the ego component, you discover something remarkable. The space that you thought was occupied by the ego can be easily released and replaced. In that space, you can begin to experience something the ego could never give you, the freedom of the soul. And each time you apply the process, you go a little deeper, you release and uncreate a little more of the ego. And this is, in effect, how you sense you are evolving because you become more the soul. And your consciousness goes up, and your frequencies go up, and you feel happier inside of yourself. And you become more loving and peaceful automatically because you've removed the things that have prevented you from being loving and peaceful. As you're letting go, you can say, I'm willing to let go of all need for this. And if something pops up, say, thank you for letting me know. And I am willing to surrender and release all need for you. This is a statement of giving yourself permission to surrender and release. Anytime you have a negative reaction, thank you for letting me know, and I'm willing to surrender and release all need for you. You don't even have to tell the soul what to do. You simply invite it in. The soul knows what to do. It knows where to go. It knows what to do. And most importantly, it knows how to do it. So you don't have to be thinking about clearing the ego every moment. You notice when an old pattern appears, you observe it, you recognize it, identify it, disengage from it, separate yourself from it, surrender it, and automatically invite the soul to merge into it. Over time, this becomes a way of living. Every time you surrender an old belief, you create more space for your true nature. And this is where your journey truly begins and ends. It leads to enlightenment. In the next video, I'll be covering the deepest core issue of the ego, fear. In the fourth video, you'll explore what lies beneath ordinary fear and discover why some fears remain even after you understand them intellectually. So look forward to seeing you there, and I will meet you there. I'm Jonathan Parker.